at a time of a cost of living crisis, we are seeing huge amounts of money directed away from public services towards this deportation machinery. Politics is obviously one reason why, but today we want to talk about the lesser understood and lesser reported part of that formula. We want to follow the money. Nathan, walk us through the industry that's grown up all around this. The surveillance companies, the detention firms, the deportation airlines. Who are the corporate winners of the deportation boom?
Where do you want to begin? The New Statesman cover story last week was quite interesting. It's about Serco, this huge bloated outsourcing firm that, among many other things, runs temporary accommodation for asylum seekers in Britain, often at a very high cost to the state, whilst keeping people in very poor conditions, and also whilst we suffer from a chronic housing shortage across the board. So you just have this system that fails for everyone. You have people seeking safety being held in awful conditions. You have taxpayers angry about the amount of money that is being spent on migration. And they've also got another 200 million, I think, for GPS tagging asylum seekers, which is a worrying step for a range of reasons. But this is, a firm with a broader record, right, that poured insane amounts of money into a black hole during COVID, has screwed up public services from not just asylum, but across the welfare state and across the NHS. And essentially, this point just exists to rip copper wire out of public services. It's this parasitic entity that doesn't really make any money other than through state contracts. Now, that's not an atypical story, right? As soon as you say crisis, and in this case, migration crisis, you whip up a panic. And suddenly there's little scrutiny on what you're doing to actually handle that crisis. I bring up COVID as an example, but there was a genuine emergency at that point, and so you can understand kind of loosening procurement rules for a short period of time, even if it creates potential vectors for corruption. This migration architecture is structural. It's gone on without proper scrutiny for years. You have all of this money to the Libyan Coast Guard, which is essentially a subsidy to the Italian military-industrial complex. You have Palmer Luckey's Anduril building surveillance towers on the British South Coast. I'm not exactly sure of the cost, but I doubt it's small. And you have the Palantir data grab. You have the surveillance detention camps that you've mentioned. It's a vast mechanism for profiting off the human lives of people crossing borders, and also profiting off the paranoia of voting publics largely in the global north. And it's not an accident. It's set up to be that way. I'm going to drop in a plug here, but I write about this quite extensively in my book, Along the Watchtower, which is coming out in November and has a chapter on the enforcement industry and kind of how it's grown up and the lobbying relationships it has with particularly the EU, but other governments as well.
Serco, by the way, the first company you mentioned there, their own annual report actually frames conflict and climate change as drivers of future demand for its services. But look, Mahamat, when our media covers the dark money of this displacement machinery, they point to traffickers and smugglers as the villains here, the exclusive sort of evil profiteers of exploiting vulnerable migrants. Meanwhile, this corporate machinery stays almost invisible in our news. Do you think that the corporations and the CEOs legally getting rich off of this deportation economy, do you think that their profits are ethical?
No, because this is a system where connected all. When we said mafia in Africa, it is not a mafia of African itself, but also a mafia of European, because you cannot go and sign agreement. And when you well understand that these people are exposed to torture and extortion crimes, the European know this is a system where we may think hundreds of years had been almost done. But this is a slavery mechanism. For me, I have witnessed so many people who paid money to get out. People who don't have had been beaten and tortured. People who have called their family to sell their homes in order to get out from this campus. Who construct this campus? It's from Europe. Millions of, handshakes. Under every handshake, there is people who dying. So the story, it's getting circles every time again. When people intercept it, return it back, put it into prison, and then pay it and get out. So let's imagine this mechanism. It's a way of profiting. It's a way of trading. After I also experienced this situation, I totally understand that this migration management, it would never stop profiting from this.